Hello. Today's training presentation is entitled Solving B to the R to the A. We have a training series entitled B to the R to the A, which talks about back row attacks. Now, this particular training series is going to get into the mysteries of back row attacks and being able to identify who are our back row players. Here's an overview of this particular training series. One, we're going to identify which rotation is our particular team in. We're going to talk about setters and opposites as well as libero and opposites. And then hopefully through the knowledge of the first two parts, we'll be able to put the puzzle together. In prior training series, we have talked about rotations. Let's quickly review what they are. Rotation is a team's numerical representation of the location and position of our setter. Rotations 1 through 3, our setter is always back row. In rotations 4 through 6, our setter is always front row. If our setter, for example, is the right back, which means our setter is or was the server, then obviously our setter would be a back row player, and our team's rotation is rotation 1. The table on this particular slide briefly illustrates a team's rotation based on the setter's position. We have talked about alignments in previous training series, but remember, alignments are simply the physical formation and placement of our 6 volleyball players on the floor. In this particular training series of solving B to the R to the A, we're going to show you some common alignments from all 6 rotations. In this particular match, we're going to have our participants be the University of Kentucky and the University of Louisville. In this particular match, Kentucky is running a 5-1 offense. That means our setter, who's number 4, will play in all 6 rotations. The University of Louisville runs a 6-2. In this particular version of the 6-2, we have 2 setters, number 5 and number 8. And both our setters will mostly only play in the back row. Now, you noted I said in this particular version of the 6-2. There are versions of the 6-2 where teams run 2 setters. One of the setters may play the back row, and another setter will sub in and play the front row. Let's look at Kentucky and serve receive in rotation 1. So in rotation 1, we know that our setter for Kentucky, circled in yellow, is the right back. So again, we know that the setter for Kentucky is back row. Since the libero is in for Kentucky, guess what? We already know 2 of our 3 back row players, our setter and our libero. We have almost solved the puzzle on Kentucky's side of the net in this rally as far as who our back row players are. In rotation 1, we know that our setter for Louisville, with circled in yellow, is the right back. And we know that right back players are back row players. So our setter is a back row player. Our libero for Louisville is also in and is right next to our setter. And of course, we know liberos also are back row players. So guess what? We already know 2 of our 3 back row players for Louisville in rotation 1 for this particular rally. Let's take a look at rotation 2 for Kentucky in serve receive. In rotation 2, we know that our setter for Kentucky, circled in yellow here, is the middle back. And of course, we know that the setter for Kentucky has to be a back row player. And the libero is still in for Kentucky, and we know by rule the liberos have to be back row players. So guess what? Again, we know 2 of our 3 back row players for Kentucky for this particular rally. We've almost solved the puzzle of our back row players for Kentucky in this particular rally. Let's take a look at rotation 2, serve receive for Louisville. We know in rotation 2 that our setter for Louisville, circled in yellow, is the middle back. Thus, our setter has to be a back row player. The libero for Louisville is still in the game. So again, we know 2 of our 3 back row players for Louisville. And again, we have almost solved the puzzle on Louisville's side of the net for this particular rally. Rotation 3, serve receive for Kentucky. In rotation 3, that we know our setter, circled in yellow, has to be the left back. Obviously, a left back is a back row player, so our setter is back row. Our libero is also in for Kentucky, so again, we know 2 of our 3 back row players, and we've almost solved the puzzle on Kentucky side of the net with regards to our back row players for this particular rally. Let's take a look at rotation 3 for Louisville in serve receive. Again, in rotation 3, we know that we have a back row setter who is left back. We have her circled in yellow. Again, our libero is in for Louisville as well in this particular rally. So we know 2 of our 3 back row players for Louisville for this particular rally, this being our setter and our libero. So again, we've almost solved the puzzle on Louisville's side of the net for this rally. You notice a pattern starting to develop here in rotations 1, 2, and 3. In rotations 1, 2, and 3, we know that our setters are going to be back row. And if our libero is in for these particular rotations, notice that even before the first referee beckons for serve, we have already solved part of our puzzle. We should know 2 of our back row players. Now it's just a matter of identifying the 3rd remaining back row player. Rotation 4 for Kentucky in serve receive. So we know that our setter in rotation 4 is the left front, which means our setter has to be a front row player. In this case, we have our setter circled in yellow. Now, since our libero is in for Kentucky, we only know just from this knowledge that we have 1 of our 3 back row players. So when our setter is front row, we can see that we may have to do a little bit more work to solve the puzzle on Kentucky side of the net in regards to who are our back row players. Similar to rotation 4, rotation 5 has our setter as a front row player. In this case, our setter in rotation 5 is our middle front. She is circled in yellow. Our libero is still in the match. And since our libero is in for Kentucky, we at least know 1 of our 3 back row players. But since our setter is front row, we see we got a little bit more work to do to solve the puzzle on Kentucky side of the net of our remaining 2 back row players. Similar to rotations 4 and 5, rotation 6 has our setter as a front row player. In this case, for Kentucky, our setter, who is front row, is the right front. Now our libero is in for Kentucky, so we at least have 1 of our 3 back row players. And again, we have a little bit more work to do to solve the puzzle on Kentucky side of the net with regards to who are our remaining 2 back row players. So we see in rotations 4, 5, and 6, our setter is front row. And if our libero is in, we at least know 1 of our back row players. So the question you may be asking yourself is, how do we find or identify the other 2 back row players? In prior training presentations, I have discussed opposites. Let's quickly review. So opposites are pairs of volleyball players who do not and will not ever play in the same row in the set. the right back, and the left front are opposites. In this example where our team Walker is serving, that would be 1 and 4. The two middles are opposites. The middle back and the middle front are opposites. In this example where Team Walker is serving, 3 and 6 are opposites. And the left back and the right front are opposites. In this example where Team Walker is serving, that would mean that 2 and 5 are opposites. Remember, opposites are pairs of volleyball players who do not and will not ever play in the same row in a set. Now let's see if this newfound knowledge or this review of current knowledge with opposites helps us solve the mystery of back row players. This is just a table reviewing who our opposites are. We have basically set this up to show you a setter's position, a team's rotation, the status of our setter, and who our setter's opposite will be. Now, we have talked about opposites. We have talked about setters. We have talked about liberos. We have talked about rotations. Now let's see if all this knowledge helps us solve the puzzle of identifying back row players. So this is what we are going to do. The first thing we're going to do while the ball is dead and prior to the beckon for serve, for every dead ball, we're going to find our setter and their opposite. And remember, one of them has got to be a back row player depending on the team's rotation. On rotations 1 through 3, we know the setter has to be the back row player. On rotations 4 through 6, the setter has to be the front row player. But if we know the setter and the opposite, we know one of our back row players. The libero and opposite. If the libero is in, happy day, because you know the libero has got to be a back row player. Now you just need to be able to identify who is the opposite of the libero, because you know that opposite has to be a front row player. Now notice that if you can identify the setter and the opposite and the libero and the opposite, then you only have 2 players left on a particular side of the net to eliminate as the potential last back row player. If you are paying attention, which you should be, to the server or to the previous server, then you know that the server or the person who has just served has to be a back row player. Let's continue. Here are some patterns that most teams probably will observe to further help you solve the puzzle. More times than not, most serving teams will line up their front row players in the front zone. I'm not saying this happens 100% of the time, but it definitely happens more than 90% of the time. More times than not, most serving teams will have their back row players who are not serving in the back zone. Again, this doesn't happen 100% of the time, but it definitely happens 90% of the time. And more times than not, most receiving teams for almost all rotations will try to have their setter somewhere in the front zone. Sometimes this is not applicable in rotation 1, and if we ever get to an example of this, we will highlight this. So we've given you some excellent tips and strategies for being able to solve the puzzle that is who your back row players are in each and every rally. Now let's see if we can use that information to help. Sometimes receiving teams will line up each corresponding row in the V shape. Sometimes the V will be as a natural V that we're used to writing in main script. Sometimes the V will be upside down. Sometimes receiving teams will have each corresponding row line up in a U shape. The U may be standard or the U may be upside down. Sometimes receiving teams will have each corresponding row lined up in a sort of curved arc. And we'll point that out as we go further in this training presentation. Now, we're going to use this particular team's lineup as an example to show you how we can solve the puzzle. Here's our starting lineup. This particular team will start this particular set at the receiving team. Number 15 is going to be the setter. This particular team runs a 5-1, which means our setter is going to be in for all 6 rotations. Our libero is going to be number 1. The libero is going to serve when number 7 comes in, and our libero is going to go out when 16 comes in. So 7 and 16, the libero will be all connected in libero replacements. They will have a couple of substitution patterns they'll make throughout this set. 11 will eventually come in for 5, and 4 will eventually come in for 10, and vice versa. And we've already mentioned that our setter is number 15 and will play all positions. So here is our particular team in rotation 5 when they're serving. Let's notice some things prior to the contact for serve. Our setter, who is our middle or center front. Our opposite is, of course, the center or middle back. We have colored arcs, to illustrate the opposites in this particular rally. Notice that this team follows some patterns here if we are observing. Notice this particular team lines up all their front row players in the front zone prior to contact for serve. And notice that with the exception of the server, of course, they line up all their back row players in the back zone. We know that one of the back row players obviously is libero. We know that the other back row player has to be the server. And since our setter is a front row player and is the middle front, then that must mean the only remaining back row player could be the middle back. So thus we solved the mystery for this particular team in rotation 5 of who our back row players are. Do you see how that works? We used our knowledge of our setter. We used our knowledge of opposites. We used our knowledge of knowing that our libero has to be a back row player. Our server has to be a back row player. And we used our knowledge of opposites. Here's the same team in rotation 5 and serve for C. If we paid attention, then we know our right back had just been the previous server. We know that our libero, who is our left back, is a back row player. Since we know that our setter is a front row player, she's the center front or the middle front, we know her opposite has to be the remaining back row player. You see how easy putting all that information together helps us solve our mystery of who our back row players are for each rally? What do? We used our knowledge of opposites. We used our knowledge of the libero. And we used our knowledge of the prior server. Here's rotation 6 for our team when they're serving. Our libero is our server. We know who our opposite for our libero has to be a front row player who was just involved in the libero replacement if we are observing correctly. We know in rotation 6, our setter is our right front. So hopefully we have been keeping up with our setter and her opposite. And since our team seems to be sticking with the pattern of lining up their back row players in the back zone that is not the server, that gives us our remaining middle back as our remaining back row player. We solved that pretty easily. Very good. Serve receive in rotation 6. We know our libero was just our previous server. We know that our setter is our right front, so her opposite has to be the left back. Hopefully we are keeping up with our setter and opposites. We know the opposite of our libero has to be our left front. They were just involved in libero replacement not too long ago. And seemingly our team is sticking with their pattern of keeping their back row players in the back zone. That eliminates the middle back or the center back that we have highlighted as our remaining back row player. In rotation 1, what do we know? Well, we better know that our setter is our server, or that our setter will be our previous server when they're in serve receive. So hopefully we're keeping up with our setter and our opposite. So our setter obviously has to be a back row player. Our libero is still in, so we know that our libero is a back row player. So in rotations 1 through 3, if our libero is in the set, we should always know 2 of our back row players. It's just a matter of eliminating the remaining back row player. And if we know our setter and her opposite, which will be the left front, and we know libero and her opposite, which we should, because they will stand out, obviously, because of the frequency of libero replacements in the set, then the remaining back row player, the left back, should be pretty obvious to us. And in this case, they are holding the pattern when they are serving prior to service contact of having their back row players in the back zone. Serve receive rotation 1. Again, our setter just finished serving, so we obviously should know our setter. And hopefully we've been keeping up with our setter and her opposite. Hopefully we've been keeping up with our libero and her opposite. Now, let me call your attention to a pattern that we mentioned earlier. We mentioned earlier that in serve receive, receiving teams will often have the setter, whether our setter is back row or front row, in the front zone as often as possible. This isn't a common alignment that you will see in rotation 1 where our back row setter is not in the front zone. It's probably one of the few alignments where our back row setter is going to be the primary ball handler and primary passer, where our setter is not in the front zone. But again, our knowledge of our setter, libero, and opposites should lend themselves to be able to easily identify the 3 back row players, because you know 2 of them, and if you know 2 of them and their opposites already, then the third one should kind of stick out. Rotation 2 with this team serving. We know rotation 2 has our setter as the middle back or the center back. Our libero is still in the game, so that gives us our 2 back row players. And our server should be our remaining back row player. Again, if we are observing this, when a team is serving with rotations 1 through 3 and a libero in the game, we should be able to easily identify our 3 back row players. Rotation 2, serve receive. Again, our setter is usually our center back or middle back. Hopefully, we are keeping up with our setter and her opposite. Hopefully, we are keeping up with our libero and her opposite. Again, we already know 2 of our back row players. If we were doing our due diligence when this team was serving, then we know that the right back was just the previous server. Thus, we know our 3 back row players. Take a look at our 3 back row players. If you were to connect them with a line or shape. Couldn't you connect them as a backwards U or a backwards V? Remember the shapes we were talking about? Our team serving in rotation 3. Now, in rotation 2, our libero was the left back. So in rotation 3, one or two things have got to happen. The libero either is going to be serving or the libero is going to be leaving the match for at least a completed rally. And since we know earlier in this particular set in rotation 6, our libero was serving, that must mean that in rotation 3 for this particular rally, our libero has to leave the court. So we know that our left front and right back, who are connected to our libero and the libero replacements, are opposites. So our right back has to be one of the back row players. Our setter, who is our left back, has to be the second back row player. And this team is holding patterns of keeping all their back row players in the back zone during service prior to contact for serve. So we now know our 3 back row players. When this team loses the serve in rotation 3, our libero re-enters the match. We know in rotation 3 that our setter is our left back. So again, we already know 2 of our back row players, the left back being our setter, the right back being our libero. If we are keeping up with opposites, we know that their opposites have to be front row players. So that this gives us only 2 other players to eliminate. And we know that if we've been paying attention that the middle back was just the server in the prior rotation. Here's rotation 4. Our setter is now the left front, which means her opposite has to be the person who's serving, the right back. We know the libero has to be a back row player, and we know the libero's opposite in this particular case has to be the middle or center front. So this gives us only 2 players that have to eliminate for the remaining back row player. And this team seems to hold the pattern of having all their back row players in the back zone when they are serving prior to service contact. So that eliminates the 3rd player being our left back, in this case, number 12, as our remaining back row player. Rotation 4, serve receive for our particular team in question. Now we know that our right back was just our previous server. Obviously, she has to be a back row player. She just happens to be the opposite of our setter. We know that our center back or middle back is our libero. Obviously, she has to be a back row player. So we have 2 of our 3 back row players. And if we can identify either our right front or our left back as being a front or back row player because of observation when this team was serving, then we should be able to easily identify our left back as the remaining back row player for this particular rally. We hope you have enjoyed this particular training presentation of solving B to the R to the A. We hope the knowledge of setters, liberos, rotations, opposites, patterns, tips, and common alignments have given you the tools necessary to be able to solve the mystery that is identifying back row players. We want to be able to identify back row players before the start of each and every rally so that when we get into situations and plays during the rally where we have potential legal or illegal back row attacks or potential legal or illegal blocks, that we will be able to accurately rule on those given situations and scenarios. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a great day, a great week, a great month, a great year, a great season.